The long story short is that JoJo Siwa is a now 21-year-old who rose to fame alongside her mother on Dance Mom. She then went on to have a merch career centering around her bobos, a musical career centered around songs fit for elementary school dances, and a social media career making the kind of videos that raise tablet children. As JoJo has aged, though, she's been called into question for a number of things, ranging from exposing her child audience to a number of predatory figures, and most damningly absolutely egregious behaviors surrounding the child band that her and her mother manage. When news of this broke, JoJo's team seemingly panicked and raced to do anything they possibly could to distract from it, bringing into play the bad girlification of JoJo. But this bad girlification, so to speak, only involved concerts that seemed like they were fit for Kiss's wardrobe, antics that only seemed controversial to 13-year-olds, and an overall strategy that just seemed to be bury it all in cringe. TikTok became absolutely flooded with videos of JoJo singing poorly, dancing poorly, driving poorly, buying adult toys poorly, whatever you could think of that was cringe and could possibly go viral, but was not necessarily so bad that an audience of 13-year-olds would be put off, was just her strategy. And because these videos are more funny and more lighthearted and they're less subject to censorship than the videos about the actual serious allegations against her, these were the videos that went viral. But now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for JoJo, well, let's discuss that a little bit further. Villain, victim, or both? I think there are a couple of reasons it's difficult to discuss JoJo. The biggest being that many people saw her grow up in a very abnormal, very toxic, very unhealthy environment, the Abby Lee Miller dance studios. I didn't watch the show, but I've seen a lot of compilations over the years, and obviously it's not just Abby Lee. It's her own mom, JoJo Siwa, and the other moms as well, adding to the toxicity of that environment. And it really seemed like A, JoJo was Abby Lee's favorite kid to disparage, and B, that JoJo Siwa was one of the bigger bullies on the show. At least that's how it looks in compilations that I've seen. I would really love to hear from people that watch the show in more depth whether they think my observations are accurate or not. And one of the bigger arguments that I see is that the production staff made up a lot of drama for the show, and thus nothing bad happened for real for these kids to be upset about. To which I say, I don't know if it matters if it's real or fake. The lines on these shows are often so blurry. Could these children tell for sure in the moment whether it was real or not? Because even if there isn't an obvious camera operator in the room, cameras and mics can be hidden. And are these children ever really sure that they're not being monitored? Because very often adults in their situation can't be certain of that. Beyond that, Abby Lee and Jessalyn and the other moms were at minimum willing to have everybody in the public think that they were that bad, the way they acted on the show. Who knows what they were willing to do in private when cameras were off? Very often, seasoned adult actors often talk about the emotional impact that playing a character can have, and how you can take it too far, and how you can let that character take over. Method acting is very controversial nowadays due to a number of people taking it so far that they seemingly couldn't take it all the way back. And these are actors with skill and with education and with all the money for therapy and support in the world, who are working 100% of the time on sets and who have a clear distinction between the spaces where they are themselves versus the spaces where they are that character. The Abby Lee Dance Studio kids had none of these distinctions, and as JoJo went on to social media stardom, she would have more and more areas of her life enter this complicated space that was both for working and acting, but also for relaxing and being herself. JoJo is a child who grew up in entirely mixed-use spaces. Her home was a workplace. Her dance studio was a workplace. Her friends' houses were a workplace. Nearly everyone around her is both a parent or authority figure or a friend, and someone who is putting an act on for the camera for the money. How in the hell is anyone, especially a child, to know what is for real? Older influencers struggle with the distinction of who their real friends are and who is just for the camera a lot. Many YouTubers who lived out their relationships in front of a camera have said that they were not sure when the content ended and the relationship began. And these were largely people who at least knew that their blood family wasn't putting on an act for the money. A brief aside about the money. So part of what inspired me to make this video is a video I saw from Be Better on TikTok where he discusses the branding of JoJo Siwa. I learned a few things from his video I didn't know because I haven't read her book or listened to a bunch of the podcast interviews that she's done, so I really thank him for that sacrifice, and I'll be referencing him throughout. One thing Be Better learned in his research is that JoJo did not realize for most of her life that she was the one who was paying all of the bills and keeping a roof over her family's head. She learned this at 18 years of age. This is a kid whose mother was determined, possibly before she was born that she was going to be a star, and began bleaching JoJo's hair blonde when JoJo was merely 18 months old. And this is a formula I see other parents now emulating, like Baby Gronk, where it's like the parent has an idea of what they want this child to be before this child even comes into the world, and before we can be for certain that that's what the child wants of their life. The moment JoJo gained fame, her parents worked every possible angle to be profitable, even allegedly pulling JoJo out of school at 13 so that she could work more, which we need to talk about all that more in a second. JoJo Siwa has made a lot of money over the years. She used to have a pretty huge merch empire and still has a pretty large one. So let's talk at the Coogan Act. Historically, there's a huge precedent for people selling their children's youth, talent, and innocence so that they, the parents, don't need to work as hard. And also, historically, many of these parents have pissed through every penny their kid made before said kid reaches adulthood. So now, legally, the parents have to put 15% of the money earned via traditional film and TV gigs into an account the child gets as an adult. They can't waste every single penny their child has ever made. I cannot stress enough that we have no idea what happened to more than 85% of the money that JoJo Siwa has ever made. I also can't stress enough that the Coogan law doesn't seem to have been updated for the modern era of social stardom, and thus is unlikely to apply to all of her YouTube earnings, and likely her brand deals or her merch sale earnings either. What we do know, though, is exactly what happened to JoJo's Coogan Act money, because she told us. This is paraphrasing it a bit, but JoJo said that her mother guilt-tripped her about that money, saying, "Oh, well, you're an adult, you're going to leave us high and dry and abandon us and take the Coogan Act money." How could JoJo take 15% of her own earnings, leave them high and dry? And even if it did, that money was earned by JoJo, not by her parents. Her mother had a separate paycheck from dance moms. And if her parents didn't treat her well enough when they were raising her so that she would want to take care of them, that seems like a them problem, not a her problem. So she split the Coogan Act money with them. And especially with the level of education we suspect JoJo has, I wonder if she's even fully aware that the Coogan Act money was only less than 15% of her total money, and we have no idea how much of the rest there is. And the absurd thing about all of this is that JoJo tells this story as an example of how her parents have not screwed her over, because she says that they could have just taken the Coogan Act money and ran, but legally, no, they could not have. And I think that's really sad that JoJo believes that since her mom didn't steal her Coogan Act money, that she should be guilt-tripped into giving up a big portion of it. And just in general, based on how JoJo talks about money, I genuinely wonder if she really fully knows how much money she's truly made. The Miseducation of JoJo Siwa. Be Better's video said that JoJo was pulled out of school at the age of 13, and it's really somewhat questionable to me how much education several of the Dance Moms kids actually got, because the show stuff was happening and a lot of homeschooling stuff was happening, and it seems like some of the parents maybe prioritized the financial stuff over the homeschooling stuff. And I try to fact check Be Better on this, but it is actually very difficult to find any information on JoJo's schooling other than the fact that she was homeschooled, so I'm pretty sure he pulled this fact out of her book, but I'm not 100% certain. Don't take this for biblical gospel fact. He's generally a very reliable source though, and that is why I'm treating this as there's a strong possibility that he's correct. Among the Dance Moms kids, it definitely seems like there was a variety of different mindsets concerning education. Literally nothing has given me the impression that Jessalyn thought it was super valuable though. JoJo does mention in one clip that I saw that she's homeschooled because she's ahead of her peers, but this was very early on, and I wonder what her level of education is, just because she doesn't necessarily have the same level of critical thinking skill that I would really expect of her age. I previously gave the example of the Coogan law misunderstanding, but another good example that comes to mind is her defense of Colleen Ballinger. I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but it was basically, oh, Colleen couldn't possibly be manipulating kids because she's treated me like family since I was 14. I feel like, especially by 21, she should have some ability to step back and recognize, wait, I was really young when we met and she's much older. Was that actually okay? Beyond that, she just seems very naive when you ask her any question that doesn't specifically relate to an industry that she's spent a lot of time working in. One of the reasons we have public schools is to prevent parents from indoctrinating their children into power structures that will cause them lifelong harm, and it's so clear to me we really need to reevaluate what an appropriate educational standard for children is, and we really just need so much more additional oversight in making sure that kids aren't being harmed by social media, employment in general. I'm sure one of the biggest arguments that is used is that these children are going to be rich and they're never going to have to do a day job, but depriving them of knowledge also prevents them from understanding the contracts that they're signing, the historical significance of actions they might be taking, whether or not they're the actual inventor of gay pop, things like that. JoJo Siwa, Joelle Siwa, and the Peter Pan effect. Something I've discussed a lot on this channel is how brand Taylor Swift and the person Taylor Swift are two totally different entities. One is the real person who has flaws and limitations and biases, and the other is brand Taylor Swift, the perfect pop star who very carefully rides a lot of lines to prevent alienating any of her fans. We have also discussed here Chapel Roan and how Chapel is basically a drag persona for Kaylee Amstutz, and how through that persona she is able to be a little bit more forward than she's comfortable doing as herself. JoJo Siwa is a persona along similar lines. I'll let B better explain because he did it really well in his video.
JoJo Siwa is not a real person. JoJo Siwa is not a human being. JoJo Siwa is a manufactured, trademarked persona that was architected and mimicked after Hannah Montana for the purpose of exploiting a young child and selling merchandise.
I spend a lot of time reading celebrity autobiographies because I believe that one of the best ways to learn is through other people's stories. And one thing that is clear again and again is that many celebrities have a public persona and a private persona. The actual person versus the brand, and we have done very little study on what those mentalities and lifestyles and that mindset can do to you long term. But if I had to make a blanket statement, I wouldn't suggest that child stars and the ultra famous were a particularly psychologically robust group. So often now we criticize child stars for not realizing how entitled or privileged they are instead of looking at the realities of Hollywood. I think if most people read autobiographies from 50 or so child stars, that they would come away with the mentality that maybe children should never be stars. They cannot consent until long after the harm is done. But that's a different argument for another day. But we do know that having two people within her at a young age caused issues for Joelle because Jessalyn was often present in momager form when what Joelle actually needed was a mother.
I had to tell my mom, I need my mommy mom. I want to be able to talk to her about mom things. Work was the only way we communicated. It was my fault because I grew up and didn't need my momager anymore.
A child's needs are going to be so vastly different than a celebrity persona. Often celebrity personas are centered around having no needs or having less needs than a normal person. It's really interesting to me that JoJo always blames herself. I really can't think of any time that I've seen her blame her mother for something, and I don't believe that's because her mom's a saintly woman.
And this happened 3 months ago, so at the age of 21 years old was the first time that she had a conversation with her mother where she said, I want you to be my mom. And not only did she say that, but she blamed herself. She said it was my fault because I grew up and I didn't need my manager anymore. When any normal person would have said, I felt bad because I grew up and I didn't need my mom anymore. But for her, it was reversed. From the age of 5 years old to 22 years old, Jocelyn was her manager first and her mom second.
And more broadly, JoJo does have this obsession with Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana, but it often feels like she's focusing on how the show presented that dichotomy more so than how Miley Cyrus, the literal human actress, handled it. The show is not real life though, and Miley, the real person, clearly struggled a fair bit with defining her own image and coming into her own after being a child star, and that was with parents who seemed to protect and support her. A lot of JoJo's original image was about staying young for as long as possible in this very Peter Pan-esque manner. But was this genuinely what Joelle wanted, or was Joelle motivated by the knowledge that acting like a child a little bit longer could make her even wealthier and likely make her mother happier with her? And Joelle isn't Peter Pan no matter how hard her mom tries. She cannot stay young forever. And I do wonder if the XOMGPOP scandal hadn't occurred if JoJo would have continued acting like a child well into her 30s. And while JoJo can tell herself as much as she wants that the criticism doesn't bother her because it is levied at JoJo, the persona, and not Joelle, the person, a lot of the criticism is levied at both. The criticism about her body, her hair, her voice, it often gets very dehumanizing because there is nothing that people like doing more than slapping down any young girl or young woman who they believe is too big for their britches. And I do think that often famous people get so much hatred disguised as criticism that when the real criticism actually comes, they can no longer identify it anymore because they're living in a partial state of delusion. I think it's particularly challenging when a child or young adult is saddled with a villainous role because even if they themselves are good at differentiating the two, audiences are often not. I think a lot about the actors who played Joffrey Baratheon and Draco Malfoy. They were playing entirely fictitious characters and yet still suffered from the way other people, usually much older adults, could not separate them from their characters. And for all of us, JoJo and Joelle are the same person. We don't know one single thing about Joelle to make the distinction. And it seems like this stage in JoJo's career is centered around recognizing JoJo isn't some mind-blowing talent like a Maddie Ziegler and making humiliation bait. JoJo dancing poorly and singing poorly and pretending to be drunk poorly and buying a grown-up toy poorly. It's turning the tide of conversation to intense mockery. And it seems to be working because no one is talking about how egregiously JoJo and her mom treated the girls from XOMGPOP. They're just talking about how cringe JoJo is. And as I've been saying, even grown adult actors with a lot of experience can struggle with who they are versus who a character is. And I can't say I fully relate, but I did play straight for a lot of my life, and especially when you spend your whole life 24/7 pretending to be something you're not, It leaves you with zero time to explore who you actually are, because that's how people figure out who they are. They try things for themselves, and they see what actually jives with them as a person. But that involves making mistakes that JoJo has not been allowed to make in her life, seemingly. JoJo's been very open since the very beginning about how demanding her schedule was and how much time she spends on all of her different pursuits. Pursuits that were seemingly chosen for her. Her mother was a dance teacher, and JoJo likes spending a lot of time in the studio. She's never been a particular talent at singing it and doesn't seem to have a huge love for it. It just seems to be something she does because it's another income stream. She's already, I think, said that she has one paralyzed vocal cord, and I wonder if all the strain she's putting her surviving one under is the right call. And in interviews when JoJo mentions possibly wanting to do something different, her mother's reaction suggests to me that a lot of guilt tripping would occur if she actually did turn away from the public eye. As an aside, I feel like one of these days we need to have a bigger discussion about how many neurodivergent child stars have been pushed to use their masking ability to develop a profitable public persona. I think it happens more so than we realize because so many celebs are quiet about their neurodivergence, but I very much believe that's what's happening with JoJo. Regardless, instead of letting JoJo grow up naturally and authentically and be herself, they waited until their hand was forced and they were scrambling to cover up the XOMGPOP sitch and then tried to grow her image up in the worst possible way. So your rebrand isn't honest. Jocelyn Siwa had and still has a lot of control over JoJo's image, and it is obvious. She still makes most, if not all, of the outfits. They're very low quality, and this is one thing that gets me. These people are loaded but are still getting janky homemade costumes with crappy face jewels from Walmart. It's supposed to be obvious that it's fake so she doesn't isolate her younger fans, just her much younger fans. The money is there. Like, there are fake piercings that are virtually indistinguishable from real. She could get them on TikTok Shop for like under 20 bucks and they'd be there in 2 days. And initially it seemed like JoJo picked the bad girl masked lesbian she wanted to be seen as and cosplayed as her. Then she went with the over-the-top Kiss tribute outfit. And the rebrand has failed for several reasons, in my opinion. Be Better made the point that JoJo is a brand that children graduate from, not one they take with them when they grow up. And because JoJo's rebrand came too fast and was hastily put into place because of the negative press surrounding the family, rather than planned and carefully eased into, people didn't have time to adjust. I also agree with Be Better in that this rebrand is exceptionally inauthentic. As a lesbian, it felt like a straight person trying to script an authentically gay identity and not even a straight ally. Communities can tell when they're being pandered to by outsiders versus when someone is from the community. Taylor Swift can reinvent herself because every version of herself maintains a lot of her core elements, like how she loves books and movies and cats and fashion. Taylor's had good looks and she's had looks that were missteps, and her image has usually shifted fairly gradually. One thing about JoJo, though, is that I'm really shocked they actually let her out of the closet, because that has almost definitely hurt her profitability, and it really feels like every decision that they make surrounding her is centered around profitability. Most Disney and Nick starlets who have made the transition from Disney kid to Disney adult do so in a manner that presents more or less straight, regardless of whether they were straight. They go from child star, rebellious phase, start establishing themselves as more grown up, and then they come out of the closet. And I think especially if the child stars are not themselves the ones scripting their own bad boy or bad girl moment, it's easier for the act to succeed among straight people than it is to succeed among us. Frankly, gay people don't like interlopers in our space because they jeopardize our well-being. All too often, they're feigning queerness to try and police or spy on queer people. And like, I'm already not excited for how JoJo's inevitably going to be used as an argument for why lesbians shouldn't be around kids, even though most of the people who hurt kids are straight. Be Better very astutely pointed out that JoJo does not respect the spaces she's trying to enter and to succeed in, such as with her comment about inventing gay pop. A comment that would have been bad enough on its own, but when it came on the heels of a song that JoJo did not write and may as well not have sung for all that it sounded like another person, it was especially poor in tone. She plays it off as a joke or something that was said deliberately to get clicks, but it's something that is a giant red flag that alienates the audience that has the highest likelihood of giving her any level of genuine support, other gay people. And part of me actually wonders if this is a deliberate act of sabotage, if the people surrounding her want her to alienate her gay peers so that she doesn't meet a girlfriend who actually teaches her how to have healthy emotional responses to things and move on with her life. But that's just a me theory. I don't have a lot to back that up, just hunches. Gay people are about living our lives as ourselves authentically. We are about real rebellion and real expression, and if JoJo gave us one hint of realness, we would go hard for her. But that's not what we get. We get fake rebellion, fake tattoos, fake piercings, fake drunk, deliberately obviously fake. JoJo claims to love the people in these spaces and the spaces themselves, but cannot even respect the fact that gay people have always made a significant portion of media. We are a significant, fundamental part of music and movies and social media. She has no respect for the people who paved the way for her to be out as a performer with a young audience without immediately being labeled as a pervert. If you have to tell me who and what you are because you are not living the lifestyle and the virtues in a way others will notice, there's a high likelihood that you're not who you say you are. And that's not me trying to say that JoJo's not a lesbian, that's me trying to say that JoJo is not seemingly responsible for any of the decisions that are being made surrounding her image or her career, or that she doesn't have the necessary context and information because that has been withheld from her. She has been withheld from knowledge of her own community. The only real way that JoJo is a bad girl is in that she is the puppet of bad people who use her to gain access to innocent children and to exploit those children for money the same way she herself was exploited for money. This is that classic scenario of, I got spanked and I turned out okay. No, you didn't. You came out the type of person who thinks it's okay to hurt children because others hurt you. No, JoJo, you didn't turn out okay. You turned out another cog in a system that squeezes every ounce of goodness out of a child, uses it to get wealthy, and then tosses the broken child aside. The only way that JoJo Siwa could act on any authentic rebellion would be to recognize her parents as some of the key figures of her suppression and to recognize the substantial part she has had in other children suffering the same fate. I think a lot about the makeover that James Charles gave to JoJo Siwa and how she described it as one of the scariest days of her life at the time. First, pause and consider that in the context of everything else she had experienced up to that point. She said that it was the scariest day of her life because she looked different. She's never been allowed to experiment with her aesthetic seemingly just to see what works for her and what doesn't. Every time JoJo even considers looking at her own age, she has to confront the possibility of alienating fans and losing money. Even this current bad girl rebrand can't go too far. She can say one cuss word, but she can't say the F word because they don't want to alienate the tween fans she has left. JoJo was never really given the chance to decide for herself what she wanted to do with herself for her career. And even when she was given a bit more control, it was with the heavy burden of understanding the huge cost to the brand JoJo if Joelle lets too much of herself shine through. I couldn't tell you what JoJo genuinely loves. Does she actually like rainbows and sparkles, or are they just what her target audience likes? Her mother says she loves bows and dance and points to moments when JoJo was a baby, but like many of us no longer like things that we loved 2 years ago, let alone 20. Is JoJo truly happy with what she's doing and how she's living her life, or is she happy that her mother is happy with her? Jessalyn has shown a lot of signs of possibly being a narcissist, and if that is the case, it is very likely JoJo has set aside a large majority of her own personality and her own wants and desires to satisfy her mother. And honestly, personally, I'm not an expert or anything like that, but it just feels likely to me. But I don't believe that she can sustain this forever, right? At some point, the dissonance between who she is and what she needs versus what her life provides her with is going to get too great. Or her and her mom will slip up and do something that ends up with one or both of them incarcerated, as it seems like they don't respect the well-being of others. I can't help but think about Taylor Swift's new album, Tortured Poets Department, and how a lot of people have interpreted it as a story about how sacrificing so much of Taylor Swift the person in favor of Taylor Swift the brand really caused her a lot of distress. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me really makes me think about JoJo a lot, especially because Taylor has family around her that seemingly care a lot about her well-being. And JoJo, well, does JoJo's family care about her well-being? When risk is financially profitable. Something we see time and again in the child star space is parents who allow their children to spend more time with predators see those children get greater access to roles and thus more money. And we know at least in part that it seems like JoJo's mom had a lackadaisical mindset when it came to protecting JoJo. It has always weirded me out that JoJo's vehicle has her face all over it, and that it's seemingly a vehicle she drives a good bit because we have seen a number of pics of it on the road. And like, teens or adults get kidnapped too, and it could motivate someone to try and provoke an accident where JoJo is legally at fault to sue her. Like, if I was any level of famous, the last thing I would do is ride around alone in a car that is recognizable, especially one that has my face all over it. Further evidence to support the notion that the Siwas prioritized profit over JoJo's safety is the fact that she was in videos with Colleen Ballinger at 13 or 14, with Shane Dawson at 15 or 16, and with James Charles at 17. Especially with Shane and Colleen, I think that if her parents had actually watched what passed for content on those creators' channels at those times, that they may have balked somewhat if they actually cared about their child's well-being. And the fact that JoJo hasn't turned her back on any of these people, even though the associations have very often in recent years hurt her, she hasn't, I suspect, because they've been manipulating her since she's a child, and she doesn't have the necessary critical thinking skills to realize it, I suspect. But I damn well know my mom wouldn't let me go on a podcast defending Colleen Ballinger with the full weight of all the allegations she's under. And even if none of these people hurt her in a direct sense, she doesn't realize that ultimately they collabed with her during a time when collaboration was the best way to get new followers. JoJo's audience has always been like 5 or more years younger than she is. These people collaborated with JoJo explicitly because they wanted to be flooded with an army of young fans with wide eyes, wider mommy's purses, and minimal critical thinking skills. YouTubers and other social media personalities are not ignorant of our audiences. You cannot succeed in this industry without having some idea of who you're speaking to and how to keep them engaged. I stopped being a Sims YouTuber in part because I realized it would be very difficult to keep my audience age anywhere near my own. I'm child-free because I don't want to be responsible for children. I'm not going to go on the internet and be responsible for other people's. But JoJo's audience has always been very, very young because until she went through her bad girl phase, the content she was creating and the image she was presenting was much, much younger than her calendar age. JoJo was used by predatory figures so that they could not only farm her audience of young viewers, but also so that when they got in a scandal, they had a wholesome brand figure to attach themselves to start looking a little bit better. Oh, they can't possibly be that bad, or JoJo wouldn't be friends with them, right? One of the many things Be Better pointed out is that with many influencers, the audience is the same age or close in age to the influencer, and throughout their career, they all grow together. And because of that, the audience isn't alienated when younger influencers hit a rebellious phase. Especially because an organic rebellious phase is always going to be a gradual progression. It's seldom an overnight thing. Miley and Justin slowly started acting out more and more, peeing in mop buckets and, acting out on stage, and that gave their audience more time to get used to what they were doing and also to age up accordingly. Denial. There's this phenomenon that when you grow up in toxicity, all you know is toxicity, and only toxicity will feel like home. And I really wonder how much that's at play here with JoJo's social circle. I can't diagnose JoJo with anything, but as someone who spent a lot of time deep in denial over how traumatized I was, JoJo has many of the hallmarks. And I do think on some level she may even realize it. But even if she does, she doesn't want to admit it because her best buddy momager is one of the people partially responsible for it, and because she can't traumatize these other kids and profit off of them once she admits that what happened to her was probably not so great for her. And honestly, because I'm sure a big part of her identity is centered around the fact that she came through a deeply traumatic upbringing and was unscathed by it, I wager behind closed doors, her and her mother make fun of the other girls from Dance Moms who have come out against Abby Lee Miller. When you're in a traumatic situation, one of the ways you cope is often by telling yourself it's not traumatic, and you often don't realize how bad that situation is until you have left it and gotten into a healthier situation. And I think JoJo just recently moved out of her parents' house. She very, very recently got out of that environment, but she's still very much entangled with them, both financially and business-wise. You can say you're not traumatized and push yourself constantly so you don't have a spare second to realize how sad and alone you really are, but the body does keep score. I will testify to that. And one day the physical and mental toll is going to catch up to her. And if it doesn't, it'll be the legal repercussions of being associated with predators and exploiting children for profit. But all of this is alleged and based on speculation and stuff like that. I don't know anything more than the rest of you. I just have suspicions based on what I've experienced in my life. If you like this video, I'm still a very small YouTuber, under 2,000 subscribers, so your liking, commenting, and subscribing on this video really helps me out a ton. If you like this type of video where I discuss things, you'll probably like this video on the I'm Alex situation. And if you would like to hear me discuss more about Taylor Swift and trauma and music, I've got a whole playlist mostly about TTBD and All Too Well and things like that you can listen to as well. Or watch, I guess, because these are videos.